Welcome to the Unfettered Speech Podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
Hi, I'm Luis Diaz Perez.
Luis, good to see you today. Leonard is on a case, and glad to have you here for our guest, who I think you guys are really going to have a lot to talk about. The great Anya Parampil, who is a journalist with the Gray Zone most recently, but it's been a long and long career as a respected journalist. She has a book out called Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire. So that's also particularly timely. Anya, we're glad to have you here today, and welcome.
Happy to be here. Nice to see you, Pat and Louie.
All right, nice to see you. Glad you're here.
Me too.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. A lot of things have happened recently in Venezuela, most significantly the double earthquake. Maybe you could get us up to speed on sort of what the state of recovery is in Venezuela and also what the political implications are. I mean, how is the government managing the crisis and how is that affecting their political status in the country?
This earthquake could not have come at a better time for the interests that have been working in the United States to gradually overthrow the Chavista government that, though it remains power in name, had already suffered serious blows as a result of the January 3rd U.S. kidnapping mission, essentially, where they went into sovereign Venezuelan airspace and picked up Maduro in his pajamas alongside his wife and dragged him to a prison cell in New York City. Since then, people have asked many questions. First of all, why was there not a significant Venezuelan response to that clear violation of Venezuelan sovereignty, considering we've heard for years about Russia's relationship with the Venezuelan military, joint exercises, and even anti-aircraft weapons that Russia had supplied Venezuela with. And on the night of the president's kidnapping, there was a response in the sense that some Venezuelan soldiers fired what they had in the moment as they saw U.S. helicopters flying directly over their bases. And yet there was no significant effort made to shoot down those U.S. helicopters and rescue the president or in any way. The National Guard and the Cuban soldiers that were there protecting Maduro were all slaughtered. And the Venezuelan state claims that weapons that had never even been seen before were potentially used in that mission. So there are a couple ways of looking at this. Some people said, well, maybe the timing of this and the fact that the Venezuelan state didn't respond is a result of the fact that anyone who would have made the call to respond to this assault would have also been then a target. The U.S. would have come and killed potentially the vice president or Diosdado Cabello or figures that are in the military if they refuse to just stand down and let Maduro be taken. Others don't accept that explanation and question the Venezuelan state that remained in place. And then, as Delcy, who is the vice president, she was the vice president under Maduro, and so it would make sense that she would succeed him. There was no rupture of the Venezuelan line of secession. So on the surface, this regime change mission wasn't fully successful because Chavismo was still there. But since then, it's been a gradual walk back of some major Venezuelan policies. And specifically, they collaborated with the U.S. military to carry out a strike on what they described as the leader of Tren de Aragua, a pretty much defunct drug trafficking organization that was once supported by the U.S. government in Venezuela. The U.S. actually carried out a strike in Venezuelan territory to execute this individual. And that is something that was another escalation, another direct assault and unprecedented assault on Venezuelan sovereignty. And so by the time this earthquake struck, a double earthquake of both over 7.0 on the Richter scale. Anyone who's been in 5, 6 level earthquakes knows that's terrifying, but you just look at the footage online of the epicenter in La Guaira state. Entire buildings collapse, entire blocks leveled. Really impossible to even gauge the full level of devastation in the initial days. But at a point when the Venezuelan state was already weakened, now you have international aid organizations and, more significantly, the U.S. military coming in and filling the void of a state that had been destroyed over years of sanctions that prevented them from having heavy lifting equipment. So they had to wait for El Salvador and Mexico and Argentina to bring in the equipment needed to get people out of the rubble. And now a de facto replacement of the Venezuelan state by these organizations, U.S. troops riding around in Venezuelan military equipment. The images speak for themselves. And most disturbing of all to anyone who cares about humanity, you have the Israelis suddenly on the ground in Venezuela, when previously the Venezuelan state did not even have relations with Israel, did not recognize Israel, had kicked the Israeli diplomats in Caracas out of the country and banned them way back in 2009. Now you have Israeli military teams on the ground participating in this rescue. And the government is openly thanking the Israeli government for its participation. This is something that I think many people are shocked to see.
Yeah, indeed. Now, how much of a reorganization has been undertaken of the Venezuelan military, which for so long had been sort of a bulwark of Chavismo? Where is that, and how are they being tested by this? And do you suspect that Israel will have a hand in influencing the shape of the future armed forces in Venezuela?
I think that whenever you have the breakdown of a state, I mean, look at what happened in Syria. It's similar. There was a 10-year civil war, 11-year civil war. The country was completely broken down and divided, even though eventually people considered the Syrian state as having won and defeated the terror groups that had exhausted it for so many years. There were parts of the country that were still under those groups' control, and the Syrian state had been weakened by sanctions and was unable to provide its services for the entirety of its state to begin with. And then suddenly, in the spring of 2023, there is a devastating earthquake that hits Syria and Turkey, and immediately those areas are taken over by international aid organizations. And because, again, the state was so suffocated, they just came in and filled the void in this time of crisis. And I think that it makes sense that in any of those scenarios, that creates a crisis within the military as well. So what happened months later after the Syrian state experienced this unprecedented earthquake? The government collapsed. Assad, who was seen as victorious in the war, was gone. And there was a clear stand down, a breakdown of his military, who allowed these armed jihadist groups to run over the country, probably just through corrupt deals. And unfortunately, crises like this certainly open up the door to that kind of manipulation. And so, again, that's why I say this earthquake couldn't have come at a better time for the interests of the people that want to weaken Venezuela.
It's a stunning parallel between the situation in Syria and Venezuela. Well, I haven't considered that. It's amazing.
And maybe a new regime change model, right, where you use bribery, weaken the state through sanctions, and every government is a patronage organization of some kind, and maybe some are more corrupt than others. But clearly, you can see that there was corruption at work in Venezuela. It seems. Why else would nobody defend the president when he was being kidnapped? Why was there no reaction after the fact? It seems that probably people were paid off. I don't know that for a fact, but
corruption can even just be saving your skin. I mean, if it comes to the moment, is everybody picking up a gun and fighting right now or not?
Yeah. It also seems to
in Iran that might be different. Iran is where you deal with the people who are not going to stop picking up the gun and fighting. That's the difference.
Well, it appears that maybe Trump thought that he was going to have another Venezuela when he attacked Iran, and it didn't work out that way. But perhaps he was told that, hey, look how simple this is, right?
Exactly. If you
So,
kill everybody, then there will be somebody willing to do business with you.
yes.
Yeah, especially at the point of a gun. But it seems like the United States has never really been able to find the standard bearer for its cause. You know, they went with the Juan Guaido fiasco. And despite their best efforts, Maria Corina Machado has never really gained traction, at least from my perception, in Venezuelan politics. You know, she's a darling of, you know, globalist elite. But when it comes to being in Venezuela, I get the impression she really wouldn't be electorally very successful. And that's kind of what kept her from, I don't know, taking over after they removed Maduro. So they were kind of stuck with Delcy to keep order. What is the status or the state of the Venezuelan opposition? I mean, is the Venezuelan opposition actually in power now through in the form of Delcy? Or are they organizing for the next election? Where and who are they right now?
I think what we're dealing here is dialectics. You have, on one hand, Chavismo is changing itself big time in order to play ball with the United States, liberalizing. You're no longer hearing about Russia and China and Iran. They're not leading the response on the ground to this earthquake. It's the U.S. military. That would have been unimaginable at the time I was covering Venezuela under Maduro in 2019. So when I was there in 2019, he was rallying with the foreign ministers and the leaders of Iran, China, Russia all the time in Caracas. They were leading the non-aligned movement. They were talking about building bricks and being a part of this alternative system. That's all gone. Now the U.S. is there. And on one hand, you can say, well, that means the United States has won. On the other hand, you can say, well, they didn't put their far-right, crazy, technocratic, the former elite back in power.
Right.
But they are playing ball with what is, we have to admit, the elite of Chavismo. They're playing ball with Chavismo. So they are forced to deal with these figures, maybe figures that are different than Maduro and Chavez, think a little bit differently than Maduro and Chavez, but say, hey, look, it's 2026. This is what we have to do to survive. And yeah, that might come with some compromises, but it also might mean that certain aspects of the Venezuelan state are preserved. You know, I don't think they can fully give up on everything that Chavismo represents to the people there. But might they have U.S. developers come in and rebuild? Are the Kushners going to come in and rebuild? I mean, these are the questions that I have. So then you can say, is that good or bad for Venezuela? Does it, because, you know, I'm, as an American, having covered Venezuela and having covered Venezuela's realignment with countries outside of this hemisphere, my argument was always, well, Venezuela and the United States should have the strongest relationship. We are major players in our region. We're very close. We're neighbors. I would prefer that the United States were the biggest helper and partner to Venezuela, but just not in this imperial, parasitic, horrible relationship where we were subjugating them. But we should be the ones, in theory, helping them rebuild in a crisis such as this. Like, why does it have to be Iran? But it shouldn't have happened this way. It shouldn't have happened with the wars and the sanctions and everything we did to weaken the state. And then for this, I don't know, act of God to come in at the last moment and just demolish what remained. It kind of makes you, there's a way of looking at this without just saying, oh, they're all traitors or the United States won. Like, they're, in some ways, when Maduro was taken out of Miraflores Palace, Trump totally killed the career of Maria Corina Machado. And I mean, he humiliated her. Then she came with her Nobel Prize to kiss the ring and bend the knee, and it didn't work. And now she's even complaining that she's not being flown in. I think she expected Trump to put her on a jet and fly her in there, and that this would be her moment to take over. But no, they're actually smarter than that. I give them credit. Rubio and Mauricio Claver-Carrón, who's the figure that was on Trump's NSC in the first term that oversaw this whole policy of Guaido. he is now working as a private consultant, gaining all the contracts to develop Venezuela that under this horrible socialist dictatorship that he railed against. Now he's the one making the money and cutting the deals because they realized, oh, we can play ball with these people. And so Rubio and Clavicrone, these guys actually came up with a very sophisticated policy of, hey, let's actually just work with Chavismo and get in there and make money, and even force Venezuela to make concessions on their sovereignty and their relationship with Israel. And they don't care who's in power. I mean, they don't care about Marina. They never cared about Maria Corina Machado as far as they could throw her. And they've thrown her to the side. She's done.
Well, what
Right.
does it say about international law in both Syria and you brought up the parallels with Syria, but both in Syria and Venezuela, it's not even a fig leaf that we're following any sort of law or procedures. It's just piracy. It's the law of the jungle, really. And it's like, is it the end of the post-war era where it's just really the strong devour the weak, and that's the way it's going to be?
Well, it had been playing out that way ever since the end of World War II when you step back and think about it. I think the whole facade of the system of World War II has lost its legitimacy. I mean, after Gaza, I personally covered the UN for years. I was really close to covering the idea of international law and human rights. And I would go and I would listen to all the speeches they would give all the time in New York and Geneva, and I would follow it online. And after a while, after the Gaza war, I just saw right through it. I thought, why are you guys even sitting there? Why are you running your mouths about any of this? Because obviously it doesn't matter. If we can watch what's happening in Gaza right now on a live stream, then the mass slaughter of these women and children, and the UN has to argue about it, and the Israelis get up there and have a voice to say, and then the world even betrays all of the concepts of human rights and international law in order to even take the sides of the Israelis. I mean, what is the point? And at a certain point, you're around the UN enough, and it's like, okay, it's just a bunch of diplomats whining and dining and walking around in their fancy suits and having parties. So yeah, that stuff is ridiculous. I mean, where is international law after the Palestinian case? I mean, and then let's step back just for a moment. The UN system, international law, all of that was established after World War II in 1948 with the Geneva Convention and the establishment of the United Nations. But what was one of the first acts that the United Nations took after enshrining itself as the arbiters of international law? They created the context and vote for the U.S. invasion of Korea and the destruction of Korea. They destroyed every two-story building in Korea, flattened it, and that was approved by the UN under this new order. But most of all, one of their first acts was to vote for the creation of the State of Israel. The Soviet Union even voted for that. And as a result, from its very inception, the United Nations was acting in order to take away the very rights that it enshrined for the rest of the world away from the Palestinian population. The United Nations was supposedly established in order to guarantee the territorial integrity, political sovereignty, and dignity of all people. And so then how can you go and create a state where people lived and create a situation where people are taken away from their homes at gunpoint and have their keys stolen? And so maybe I'm a cynic, but if you just back in 1948 had looked at the UN's act there, I don't know how serious we could take all of these concepts of international law from the get-go. I mean, it's nice in theory to talk about, and I love to talk about the theories of states. That to me makes more sense, because when you just look at the world in terms of states and their interests and how they're going to act, then it says, okay, yeah, well, some people's human rights matter and some people don't. Always in the context, because the U.S. will weaponize human rights when it's convenient for them and ignore it when it's not. So it's kind of always been kind of a flimsy concept for me.
Precisely, yeah. I mean, it's always been all that legalism is just a fig leaf for the interest of, powerful states when they want to take action, and they'll gladly, as you point out, sacrifice the human rights or even the basic sovereignty of a nation, like we saw in Venezuela. I mean, you would think that that would be a fundamental precept of, a system of international law, and that was completely disregarded, earlier this year in Venezuela, and in case by case by case by case. It's interesting to note, though, to get back to a point that Patrick made, about the Cold War paradigm, that, and I haven't read, or I didn't hear the speech, but apparently Trump made a very eccentric speech to celebrate the 4th of July, decrying communism in the United States, as if, so it felt like, you could have been back in the 1950s and the
Right.
speech would have been more apt and appropriate. But this is sort of I think it reflects the reliance of elites on those paradigms that they've used to hold power without having innovated, to use their word, a new ideological scheme to justify their prerogatives. So we get Trump giving a peroration on communism, which, I mean, as soon as I saw the article about that, I laughed like I'm laughing now. I mean, I don't know. What's your reaction to that, Anya?
I watched some of that speech just because I always like to know what's going on with these big cultural and political moments. And it was nuts. It was not what I expected. I mean, I just never know what to expect these days with Trump. But communism, I was like, I guess that's their new thing that they're obsessed with. That's what the right is going back to because they have nothing else. Trump is like trying to brag about this war that we just had with Iran. Also during the speech, he said, we sunk 109 Iranian ships and everybody on the mall cheered. And he was trying to make it seem like it was this great victory when in reality, anybody who's followed it would recognize that Iran kind of beat us. And we're in this position now where on our 250th anniversary of our independence, when we should be like celebrating and happy, it's kind of like our country's just been revealed to be this dog with a collar tied to Israel. And everybody knows it. So Trump is trying to keep this very unstable peace together out of his own interests at this point because of the World Cup, because of midterm elections, because I don't really think he wants to have any more war. I'm not sure that he wanted this to begin with, but he definitely went along with it in a way that I think many of his supporters even were surprised. And so he's now in this situation where he has to make up an enemy like communism, which I don't even see as a huge threat in the United States at this point,
Yeah.
and rail about that. But it is quite stunning when you think about it. Yeah, that was our 250th birthday as a nation, and we're bragging about losing a war to a country that's 3,000 years old. So maybe we just need to step back and have a little perspective and try to do a little bit better.
I mean, when it comes to perspective, I heard that Trump reacted to video of the funeral that took place just this last weekend and saying, "I was told that they didn't like him." Right? I mean,
Yeah. Well, he's already been through this with Soleimani. He went along with Netanyahu's plan to assassinate one too many times. And so I don't think he can play that card anymore. He knows better. I think he had enough people giving him another side of the story just based on what we've seen come out with Tulsi Gabbard, even though people were critical of her going along with what they saw as her going along with the war. Ultimately, there were the moments when she made the point to say that Iran was had not made any changes to pursue its nuclear program, and they were trying to push him away from making these mistakes. And unfortunately, he went the other way. There's the reporting about J.D. Vance as well, speaking for this MAGA voice that is against the war. And there was Tucker Carlson at one point, I know, who you guys have had on the show here. He at one point had Trump's ear, and now we no longer hear about him going to the White House and having meetings with Trump over this issue because those people lost. So Trump knew better. For him to stand back and say, I didn't know that they liked him, that's him playing dumb for the media and for the people that watch Fox News and don't know anything else. But like everybody else gets it. Everybody else knows that he knew better and that he ran against this and that he's lying and betraying people, I think.
Well, that's where the communism comes in because he's lost a part of his base that wanted no new wars. He's lost a part of his base that wanted to bring manufacturing back or bring jobs back or he did all the things that he promised to
Yep.
do. He's betrayed every single one of those promises and so many supporters. So what do you say you're fighting for now? Well,
Right.
communism.
Even the immigration hardliners would be disappointed with some of the. I mean, there were like the moment of the anti-ICE protests,
Oh, yeah.
and there was the major like flashpoint for the nation on immigration. But since then, all of that's died down, and you can see the people that are very hardline on that issue feel betrayed by Trump. So there's really not much left to his base because what was it? It was immigration. It was no new wars. Immigration, no new wars, and it's like he's really good at putting on a show for people. They didn't need to do what they did with ICE and deportations in order to like address some of the concerns that his base had. Instead, it's always just this big fist, made for TV drama. Where and now with the wars too, it's just. It's gone beyond what anybody could have imagined. And the Israeli relationship obviously has come out, I think, way more as a result of all of this, which is why I think it's a good thing. I mean, that Trump is in there. I don't know how the United States and Israel can do things any differently, except to not be naked about it and to get away with it in dirty trickery, which is what the Democrats are really good at. I mean, we had a genocide in Gaza under Biden, and the major Democratic organizations just didn't care. And it was like it wasn't happening. But now when Trump is out there doing war in Iran, people in the Democratic establishment are mad. People are on even mainstream media becoming critical of the war, which is why they need to take over CBS and CNN and make it even more pro-Israeli and just like a mouthpiece for Trump with people like Bari Weiss in charge. It's like Trump in some ways rips the mask off even more, just as he did the first time around.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any chance that they might pull back at all. I mean, I've read about an agreement between the U.S. and Israeli military to deepen their integration now. It seems like, from the U.S., that the U.S. has to sort of shore up its position in the Middle East because they've lost 13 bases. I mean, they lost the basic infrastructure of their domination in the region, or at least a major pillar of it, in this war, all of a sudden in one fell swoop. So it would seem to me that they're pushing this integration with Israel now just to shore up what's left of their ability to determine events in the region.
Or to shore up what's left of our sovereignty in the United States and just make sure that we're like contractually obligated to keep this relationship going forever, because Israel knows it's so unpopular with the American population and that its days are numbered. It basically has to take over. Look what's happened with both parties. If anybody raises their voice against Israel, whether you're Thomas Massey or Cory Bush or anyone else in Congress, you lose your seat to some no-name that comes out of nowhere. So, I mean, now Israel, it seems like, is in this scramble to make sure there's no dissent within the United States on a national level, and to contractually obligate the United States with a law to share intelligence and just disintegrate any separation of church and state, I guess, if our church is Israel, then it's kind of a pretty bad situation that we're looking at there.
But there's no pushback on that, right? Other than Thomas Massey, there's
No.
nobody pushing back. I don't even think Ro Khanna's pushing back. Maybe Ro Khanna pushed back on it. I'm not sure about that.
It's quite remarkable. I would have to look at a list. I think
Yeah.
maybe Ro Khanna, but I don't. Honestly, all I can guarantee you is that it wouldn't be enough, because it should have been every single member of the United States Congress voting against such an insane concept. I mean, what? Did you swear to uphold your oath to the Constitution, to the United States? or are you loyal to some other country? Because if not, that vote should be pretty cut and dry. Like, no, I don't just say that my country has to give up its intelligence to another state.
But maybe there is one source of resistance to that, and that's in the population itself. I mean, I'm going to dig into this Colorado election and try to understand the meaning of the pro-Palestine, anti-Zionist woman who just defeated a veteran congressperson. Do you have any insight into that election and its meaning in this discussion?
Well, there are certain pockets of very progressive and very international areas in the United States, such as New York, now Denver, where this vote just took place, where you can have a candidate come forward and discuss these issues and win, because that area, like certain areas, are just so uniquely primed for that kind of candidate. Michigan is another case. You have now an Arab candidate running, an Arab American candidate running, AIPAC attacking him, spending all of their, and the Democratic Party attacking him, making all of their effort to stop him from winning the Democratic Party primary. But there's a good chance that he could succeed just because of the unique character of Michigan. And
well, the two mainstream Democrats in that race consolidated to one, right? And
exactly.
I believe it was the incumbent who dropped out in order to consolidate the support for the old guard against this new guy. So I think it's 70% of Democrats disagree with our current Israel policy. So there's no way you have a candidate like that. It might not just be Denver and and New York and other places you mentioned. 70% of Democrats nationwide don't support what their party is doing with respect to Israel right now. So how long does that last? Where you have 70% against?
It's just that in so many of those areas, it's like the mainstream Democratic candidate just often wins the primary. But I think they'll succeed in New York and other places. And then once they're in Congress or in the Senate, honestly, that's when the hard work begins, because it's one thing to get in there and say the right things. But we've seen that play out with people like AOC before. And then they go in there and think they're going to be somebody big in the party. And then they start betraying the people that put them in power, just as Trump did. So I am wary of people all the time in politics. That's why I focus on media, because there's this other candidate, Graham Plattner, that is running. The Democratic Party seems to have just successfully taken him out with the same script that they used against Thomas Massie, which was this last minute Hail Mary pass of a girlfriend who has some bad feelings about a prior relationship, that they give this tell-all interview to the press. When this woman who now is coming forward to attack Plattner had previously told the New York Times they were in a committed relationship and she had fond memories of it. Now she's giving an interview to Jake Tapper and saying he's violent. And, I'm not necessarily someone that followed his race that closely, but I just find it interesting that now the one progressive candidate who was, again, possibly speaking out against in favor of Palestine, against Israel, in a state like Maine, where because people there are pretty progressive, may have voted for him. And now they take him out with the same.
The Democrats would rather have Susan Collins back, a Republican, than coalesce around this guy. And those allegations, as you write, are pretty specious. You never know what's true or false. But this woman's a Republican operative who's worked for Israel, who went to one publication, the New York Times, with some allegations that didn't really hit the mark. And then she went back to Politico and said, I just remembered some new things that are even worse.
Yeah.
So now, and now he seems to be, but, and Plattner too is a guy who says he's a working class guy, but he went to some fancy public school, private school. Is it Tabor or Chode or one of those where, lots of oligarchs go to? He's not necessarily the guy he says he is either. So the whole thing seems like a house of mirrors. I can't make.
That's why I just don't trust politicians usually. I mean, sometimes, every once in a while, I don't know much about this woman in Denver. She seems like actually she could be the real deal, and when it comes to her issues, like I don't think she could be like Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib. There are people who are less likely to betray their constituents than someone as ambitious as AOC. But most politicians, yes, I just see them as these kind of cynical, ambitious actors that say nice things to get elected, and then, especially on the Israel issue, for whatever reason, always end up doing the opposite.
Yeah, I think both parties, I mean, the system itself seems impervious to reform, particularly at the national level. If you get, you may get somebody bubbling up locally, like this woman in Denver, somebody else here or there that pops up. And then when they reach the national stage, there's a lot of mechanisms to keep them, to discipline them and to keep them on the farm. And I think Mr. Plattner probably ran into some of those, just now as well. Because he seemed like he might have been a shoo-in. I also saw something about a tattoo. I don't know how sensational this was, but there was some story about him having a Nazi symbol or a Nazi tattoo or something like that.
I mean, he's a guy in the military. They get a lot of tattoos, and so they picked one, and they said that it was like
he survived
offensive.
the Nazi tattoo. He survived cheating on his wife. He survived like all these other scandals.
Yeah, and then, so then they had to say that he was
like, yeah, you know what? Like 5 years ago, something else happened, and that brings him down. He was almost at the finish line.
Yeah.
He almost got there, and then
Yep.
you never know what's
so-
going on behind the scenes.
I just have to say that I find, again, it's so cynical. I saw these major progressive influencers who I already kind of called out online, who under these other allegations just a few weeks ago were saying this is ridiculous and not credible. He, if he'd sexted my mom, I wouldn't even care. I would still support him. And now all those people are withdrawing their support. The only thing that changed is just the party apparatus and the pro-establishment forces came even harder for him, made all of his team jump ship. And so now these people see the writing on the wall and they want to distance themselves from him. But I think, why not just have some... if you already defended the guy for cheating on his wife and having a Nazi tattoo and all of these other things, I mean, I wasn't out there doing that. But at this point, I'm going to look at the situation and be like, you don't think it's a little strange that right before he's going to win, they come out with something else? I mean, come on, have some integrity.
Right. Yeah. It seems hard when something's a little hard to believe. It probably is a little hard to believe, right? It's like you got to just think this through. But I agree with you that politics is incomprehensible because you never know who's doing what to whom, when, and what the real story is. I mean, Plattner seemed like a bit of a false, a Potemkin candidate anyway. So who knows? And then the corruption that they have, both the carrots of corruption and then the sticks of, as Louis mentioned, the discipline that they can use against you. It seems pretty hard to do. We had Nick Cruz on a long time ago, and Nick said, "Why would I want to run for Congress? What could I do there? I can do more as a internet personality that I can do as a congressperson."
That's why when Marjorie Taylor Greene resigned, I totally understood it because she was fighting a good fight. Like, she was saying everything that needed to be said all the time, especially on Gaza. I just thought it was awesome. And they made her life, you can't do anything. You can't accomplish anything in there. And they're making your life miserable. Like, why not just, use your voice for something else and enjoy your life with your family and and work for good, keep your platform or whatever. Congress just seems like only for people that want to be in power and like want to feel important. So that's why I just don't trust people that want to do it anyway. I just don't.
But even in those avenues that the media might provide, there seems to be a narrowing and institutional pressures to control speech. We are keeping a particular eye on what's happening in Europe around free speech. And I know that you at the Gray Zone in particular have some experience with efforts in Europe and in the UK to pressure journalists. How do you assess both, that situation in Europe and is that making its way into the United States? Are dissident journalists facing kind of overt pressure that, say, Kit Clarenberg faced and, as far as I know, continues to face? And if so, what would the American face on that pressure look like?
I would say there are still key differences. Thank God. 250 years into this project, we still can say it's a little bit better than the UK, and those rights that we fought for and that we claim to have based this country upon still do stand when you compare it to the UK. Just because the UK is so tremendously horrible. I mean, I don't know if I would be able to travel there just because I'm associated with the gray zone, considering they, arrested sorry, it's so hard to say his name sometimes. Kit Clarenberg. It's a running joke at the gray zone. That they arrested him for coming in to see his country, coming in to see his family, coming into the country, and questioned him just about his journalism. He's not accused of any crimes, but I remember speaking with a British professor of law back when I was growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he explained to me that in the UK we just don't have this concept of free speech, and you might not realize it there, but like you hear about this in your U.S. history class, and it's true. So the harassment of journalists there, and I think other activists as well, including Richard Medhurst and people that have done the Palestine Action, or the people that do physical resistance against the Israeli weapons firms in the UK. All of this, which might not be speech, but there is just unprecedented terror laws and all of these this crackdown in the UK that in some ways does make me proud to be American in 2026. But that's all the more reason why in our country I just want to keep making sure that we fight for those rights and make sure that we don't take them for granted. I'm sorry that I couldn't give such a great answer on the UK as my British colleagues or as Max or Aaron, but I've been so focused on some other issues that I can't always recall all of the details of everything going on in the UK, because the UK on its own is just such a crazy disaster. And I have colleagues at the Gray Zone that can talk about it all day.
Well, we've had
You
guests
should
like
have
Alexander.
Kit. Have you had Kit on?
Not yet. No, we'd like to have Kit on.
Kit is, you got to bring him on to
Yeah.
talk about all of that, because
Yeah.
he's so fun. He's a great guest.
Yeah, well, we've had Ali Abu Nima on, and he was arrested in Switzerland for giving a talk. He was arrested pre-talk, and then he just went back to court to sort of get vindicated in Switzerland. But you've seen people get sanctioned. I believe in the EU, 3 people just got sanctioned for reposting an RT segment. A truthful RT segment, by the way, but that shouldn't be illegal if it were untruthful. But anyway, even posting an RT segment can get you sanctioned now. They're desperate to hold on to power, and just terrified of dissenting voices over there. Maybe here too, but you definitely see it over there. Alexander McCorris has pointed that out, that there's no other way to keep the grift going. People can see right through it.
Yeah.
So
It's
what
pretty
have you
bad
got left
there.
except violence and repression?
Yeah, and they're pretty horrified of both the extreme right and left, and so it's like from both sides they're just really trying to crush it over there.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out too that the British are among the biggest supporters of the Ukraine war, or that is of Ukraine against Russia, and all that anti-Russian rhetoric. That England, London is the epicenter of all that, and it seems like the British ruling class needs to point to a bogeyman to keep some, as the rationale for their maintenance in power. Because otherwise, people would, if the public wasn't being told, oh, there's an enemy out there, then they start looking inside and start questioning some of the things that we just talked about here and the rest of their straits. So it seems like the British ruling class in particular is exposing their desperation when it comes to maintaining their hold on power. So you get the suppression of rights internally and the foreign bogeyman as well.
Do you think, Anya, though, when you said about the free speeches, we're a little safer here with the First Amendment, but yet you've seen a lot of things that the Trump administration, after giving one of their, if you remember when Trump was inaugurated, he came out with these little video clips that talked about what he was going to do. Remember them? And he'd say, and one of them was about free speech in particular. And he said, the era of censorship is over. And not 3 months later, he was deporting students for editorials in their student newspapers.
Oh yeah, it's not perfect, but we can at least challenge it on principle in the United States. And I've from my experience at RT and their effort to crack down on that channel and my work at the Gray Zone. I mean, we've been harassed, but we everything is above board with us. People know that we do this because we want to show the United States like a better way that we could be. We're not trying to, undermine the United States, which is how they sometimes try to spin us, as like, oh, we go to Iran because we hate this country. But no, the U.S. public should hear from the people of Iran, and we should have good relations with them and get along in the world instead of constantly dragging everybody down. Doesn't really make sense why we have to live in the world this way. But
There's this theory out there that, and I think it was the Democrats pushed it really hard before Trump came in power, which is sowing discord should be a crime. And our
yes,
political system is basically a dialectical system
right.
where two sides have opposing views and somehow work out some sort of synthesis of these two opposing views. That's what it is. So it's built around discord, but yet, mainly the Biden administration. We had a guest on just last week, Omali Yoshitella, who was arrested for
Yeah.
quote unquote sowing discord because he had a view of the Ukraine war, which was in opposition to what the Biden administration thought. So that became a crime in the Biden. And so my question to you is, Trump has done what he's done. It's hard to know what's going to happen next with this cast of characters. But if the Democrats get in power, which they're likely to do at some point, where do you think they go with free speech and expression? From here, they go back to their old ways of, social media suppression and the
Yeah.
other things they were up to.
Yeah, absolutely. I covered that case. That was a Biden administration case where they went after the group in Tampa. And I worked for RT. The whole concept of sowing discord was actually first rolled out when they wrote this this intelligence report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence that was supposed to prove that Russia hacked and stole the 2016 election for Trump. The main pieces of evidence were all just clips of RT talking about Occupy Wall Street, talking about, anti-war protests in the United States, and claiming that RT, and that specifically Abby Martin's program, Breaking the Set, were sowing discord in the United States, and that was actually the proof of the crime of Russia hacking and stealing the election. And so then, they kept it and continued to use that argument in Florida. But thankfully, our courts worked in that case, and they weren't found guilty because we do have a system that in some cases work. And, there are great lawyers out there like our friend Len Goodman and Janine Eunice out there fighting against these attacks on free speech. So we have to be grateful for the fact that we have an infrastructure in this country where we can even do that. Because yes, there are places where it's like, yeah, if you want to assert your right here, you just don't even have it.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, though. In asking what the Democrats have on offer, going ahead, what do you? I mean, I see, for instance, three leading candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination, who are Zionists. Those are
Yep.
right. Where's the change? What's the change on offer? What do you think this election nationally has will be about?
I think they'll have to adopt more progressive policies or language, promises, hope and change. I think they'll have to go back to kind of the Obama hopey changey stuff with somebody like AOC eventually. But it'll be a gradual warm up to that with a bunch of horrible candidates like Gavin Newsom and Pritzker and whoever else. And then whenever they get in there again, they never do or deliver on whatever it was their most progressive policies were. So yeah, I just don't have a lot of hope for either of those parties.
Yeah, two cheeks of the same backside, as I've heard them described.
Absolutely.
Before,
George Galloway always says something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, Anya, before we let you go, what is you're covering a lot of issues, including Venezuela, obviously. But where do you see things heading for the next year or so? Can you make any predictions about what happens next?
Probably the alien invasion script. I don't know. These days, I'm joking. These days, I don't ever make predictions because I woke up thinking one thing on January 1st, the next day or two, Maduro's coup, then there's a huge earthquake. After Gaza too and the wars in Iran, the horror show continues. We
Right.
just have to keep talking about hope and what can be better, so that I think on one hand the hopeful thing that I say is that people are waking up to the truth, and so it just has to be this bad in order for the truth to come out, because we've been living kind of like in, I mean, it's such a, I don't even want to make a Plato's cave reference because it's just kind of played out, but you know what I mean? We're kind of all realizing like, wow, the light's turning on, and maybe we need to have a conversation about the big picture and everything. There's been a lot of change in this country over the last few years, and I think hopefully, with the COVID experience, that's another thing. After going through that, I don't make predictions because what's it going to be next? All I know is that each of these events take us closer to some sort of truth that I think we can agree on as people who care about humanity.
Well, I think you're probably right. That's a good place to end. The other thing that I'm always encouraged by is when I see people who used to be on the left and these people who used to be on the right agreeing on so many issues because, as you say, they've all been put through it, and nobody trusts people in power anymore. Nobody trusts the media anymore. It's just, so people are waking up. If it's not
Yeah.
Plato's Cave, it's the New York City apartment with the turn on the lights and the cockroaches start
Yeah.
running.
Yeah,
So,
turn off FIFA, guys. It's rigged. It's stupid. I understand liking sports. I really do. I appreciate athletes, but this is ridiculous. Like, just turn it off. No, I'm cynical.
FIFA's rigged, you said?
Well, it's just been ridiculous. The way that they treated the Iranian team, not allowing them to come into the United States, forcing them to travel, taking away goals with this new VAR system.
Yeah,
When
that was ugly.
offside was always this issue in soccer. Now they've made it like they've taken it to the next level. You have the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick threatening to sue FIFA and forcing them to rescind a red card or allow a player to participate, and then the US still gets creamed.
Right.
I mean, it's embarrassing. It's just I feel like FIFA as an organization is so corrupt and evil that it should just be boycotted, and we should just like start watching boys in the neighborhood play soccer, like support local teams, do that. Messi and Ronaldo should help use their money for that instead of like this FIFA thing. It's ugly.
Well, it didn't help them. They still lost 4-1.
Exactly.
yeah. Well,
Well,
Anya,
this has been a great
thanks so much.
conversation.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to
Of course.
talk with us today. We'd love to have you back. And don't forget Anya's book, Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire, available everywhere. I'm not going to say the online retailer, but available everywhere. And of course, The Gray Zone. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast.